Hello everybody, welcome back to the workshop. You know, we've all seen those videos where somebody says, got a real treat in store for you today. Well, in this case, if you're a fan of Stanley tools or tools in general, or hand planes, Stanley hand planes, or American industry, or heck, even American history in general, I think I really do have something special here for you today. As you can tell by the title, this unassuming, funny-looking, ergonomically challenged plane is actually the granddaddy or grandmommy of pretty much all metallic block planes. And how cool is that? This here that you're looking at is either a 9.5 or a 9 3/4 Type 1. This was put out by Stanley in the early 1870s. This was the first of Stanley's block planes that was the progenitor of this guy, a ladder model 9.5. And Stanley basically created every permutation you could think of block plane. Here's a number 18, Type 8. This is a number 17, which looks a lot like this guy, but the nickel plating. Then there was the 220 family that spun off. This is a modern English version of the 220. Here's an older version of the 220, and it didn't stop just there. Stanley, of course, came out with the simpler model, the 110, and a permutation of the 110. And of course, it didn't stop at Stanley. Here's an American boy plane that was obviously patterned after the 110 family. And it wasn't just Stanley in the sense that all of Stanley's competitors had hand planes that looked a lot and certainly functioned just like these guys. And all those block planes, I think, owe their existence to this unassuming guy here. There is no front knob, but instead just a screw that I have not even tried to loosen to adjust the throat in the front. The lever cap, as you can see, is kind of similar to a bench plane. There's no relief in the back, and the cam lever on it, the iron, and here's a better view of the body. And this is not a lateral adjust lever here, but a depth adjustment lever here. Well, I did some research on this guy. I think most of us are familiar with the common block planes, but I don't think a lot is known about these really early versions. Most of my information came from three sources. There's Patrick's Blood and Gore website, which is just a treasure trove of common language information about all planes Stanley. Virginia Tool Works had a very nice website that laid things out in an easy to understand way. And finally, there's the John Walter book. He not only goes over all of Stanley's planes, but he has a type study on the 9.5 and 9 3/4 and its families of planes. There's also a historical narrative in the book that he refers to as a type study written by John Wells and Jack Scholhammer. Hopefully I'm pronouncing those names correctly. According to the type study, this model was likely manufactured in 1871 because it debuted in the January 1872 catalog. Other sources say it was first offered in 1873. Type study also claimed that the 9 3/4 debuted in the 1872 shirt pocket catalog. So apparently the 9.5 came out a little bit before the 9 3/4. And it also appears as though most of the 9.5 have this threaded hole in the back, because the type study makes a reference that only one of these is known to exist that doesn't have the tapped hole. So from what I can gather, it's very hard to tell if you have a Type 1 9.5 or 9 3/4. And finally, the type study makes another curious reference. It says by 1874, the catalog shows that the 9.5 has a Type 2 configuration. However, the 9 3/4 still looks like it maintained the Type 1 configuration. So that's a little different. And it seems as though the Type 1 with the bench plane style lever cap was superseded after 1874. Meaning that this example here is at least that old. How cool is that? So think about that. This guy here may likely have been made somewhere between 5 and 10 years after the end of the Civil War, or the War of Northern Aggression as other people know it. As Patrick's Blood and Gore points out, this angular backside of the iron was anything but comfortable to use, and you can imagine if you're trying to push this through wood, these little sharp angles here will dig into your palm. Doesn't seem as though Leonard Bailey, when he designed this, spent a lot of time using it. However, Stanley almost immediately went to a different lever cap design, and I don't have a Type 2 to show you, but from the drawings and pictures I've seen, it's kind of similar to this one. It curls up a little bit more, but they very quickly got a more bulbous raised back here to push on. And after several permutations, it eventually morphed into this shape that we're all familiar with. Stanley didn't get around to making the rounded back iron until the late 1800s. And with the debut of Type 2, there was a knob that appeared here. However, the eccentric lever we're all accustomed to didn't show up until around the 1890s. And this backward-leaning stance of the cheeks is known as the Excelsior body style, as opposed to the far more familiar, more or less centered cheeks of pretty much all of other Stanley's planes. This depth adjustment lever here is covered by Bailey's patent of 6/22/1858, which describes using an offset cam type lever to advance and recede the depth of the cut of the iron. Here you can see the pivot point is offset, and there's a pin which engages these grooves in the back of the iron, and as you move the lever back and forth, the pin goes forward and backward, adjusting the depth of cut. So here's the patent. Here's the diagram of the business end of it. And this here sits behind the iron and the cap iron and the lever cap. It's kind of hard to see. Here's the lever, and here's the screw. That's the head of the screw here. And let's go down and read some of the text just to get a flavor for it. So it starts up here at the top. I, Leonard Bailey of Winchester in the county of Middlesex in the state of Massachusetts, have invented a new and useful improvement in joiner planes. He says up here in this paragraph next to number 15, the nature of my invention consists in the application of a movable friction plate and a device for adjusting or moving it to the rear side of the throat of the plane stock, and so as to support the plane iron or cutter and be a means by which it may be set or adjusted with respect to bearing or the bottom of the plane stock. So I think this is a very long-winded of saying it provides precise depth adjustment. But the real business end of what he's doing doesn't start until this bottom paragraph here on the left. He describes I as a metallic plate which is placed flat against the rear of face A of throat B and serves to support the plane iron. This plate I is formed with a slot, little b, and a circular opening, little c, the latter being for the reception of an eccentric, little d, projecting from the lever, little e, which turns on the fulcrum of the screw, little f, arranged as shown in the drawings. And that's basically talking about this business here. Here's the plate I with the slot in it B that has a hole in it, little c, that takes the eccentric, which is little d right here, and it serves on a fulcrum. F is the top of the screw, and here's the shaft of the screw in the side view, and little e is the lever. And you can see where this screw is off center. If you were to rotate this lever counterclockwise, the eccentric, or the disc, would rotate downward a little bit, pushing this entire plate downward. And the slot in this plate through this big screw, similar to a modern plane that holds the iron to the cap iron, this holds the iron to the cap iron and this plate in the back of it. So as this plate moves downward or upward, it carries with it the iron and the cap iron. So that's kind of a difference between a modern hand plane. Usually the depth adjustment reacts on the cap iron directly. And I think as soon as they started building this, somebody pointed out, you don't even need this plate. You could just have this depth adjustment mechanism operate on the cap iron directly. And, they eliminated this whole thing. And if we go back down to the text, he says by turning the lever on its fulcrum in one direction, the friction plate will be raised upward in the throat. By turning the lever in the opposite way, the plate will be depressed. As the plane iron cutter rests directly on and is forced down by the friction plate, it would be moved by and with the latter so that its cutting edge will be adjusted with great nicety with respect to its distance from and beyond the supporting face or bottom surface of the stock. Boy, isn't that an awful lot of words just to say you get a nice precise depth adjustment effect. And the other thing that I think is interesting here, he describes here in this paragraph where the adjuster applied directly to the plane iron as it is to the friction plate. That is, were we to dispense of the friction plate and insert the eccentric of the adjuster in the circular orifice made in the plane iron. Instead, if you put the adjuster on the plane iron directly, is what he's saying, it will readily be seen that very little wear of the iron is permissible, he says, such as must necessity take place in sharpening it, or in other words, a reduction of its length, a distance of the eccentricity of the eccentric, would render the iron useless. So basically he's pointing out you need to have a carrier that's independent of the iron, because as soon as you sharpen the iron and remove enough material equal to that of the level of depth adjustment, then the iron becomes useless, because you can no longer plunge the iron deep enough to get a cut. So I think that is the genesis of attaching it in later years to the cap iron. And I thought that was kind of cool. I always like reading these things. This depth adjustment was somewhat fragile, so Stanley quickly abandoned it for the more elaborate knob and lever of the early 1880s. This configuration here. The iron miraculously doesn't seem very pitted, but it certainly has its share of surface rust. I don't know if I'll be able to get a clean view of the trademark. I can barely make it out, even under magnification, and it's because I know what I'm looking for. It's referred to as trademark A1 in John Walter's book. Unfortunately, my example here has what looks to be a divot drilled into it from a modern twist drill bit. Almost looks like somebody was trying to test if this was a material that could be drilled. What a shame. I didn't find any information as to whether or not this was originally japanned. I don't personally see any remnants, anything like a paint on it. It does look as though it may have been blued, but this may simply be a magnetite coating from the many decades of oxidation. And by magnetite, I mean this dark form of oxidation that you see in a lot of old steel tools. This is a form of iron oxide that's reasonably stable and offers a teeny bit of protection. I posted some pictures of this guy on a forum and asked specifically about this tapped hole back here. And the feedback I received was that this was indicative of actually a 9 3/4, and it was lacking the tail knob. And as luck would have it, I found a suitable tail knob of the correct vintage. As I mentioned earlier in my research, I do believe the 9 1/2 had this tapped hole, so I'm not sure that this was originally sold as a 9 3/4, and I'm not sure if there's any way to tell. But this, combined with this, for all intents and purposes, makes a 9 3/4. In terms of tuning up or restoring or cleaning up, it's probably going to be closer to nothing. I almost certainly will soak this in liberal amounts of oil before I try to loosen the screws and the cam lever here, and I will certainly try to clean it up with soap and water. But stay tuned. Well, that's all I have for this guy. As always, I appreciate you stopping by and giving me the courtesy of your time and attention. Please like, subscribe, leave a comment if you have something to add or have a question. You know I love to read them. As always, stay safe, take care, keep your eyes out for the next one.